Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to my complete Raiden guide. Raiden Shogun, or Baal, is the newest character and the electro archon who's finally here. She fills the role as being a burst support or a sub DPS who can restore energy for your entire team while dealing damage on field, and she does have a very unique role that she excels at. In this video, we're going to be covering everything you need to know about this pretty complex character, cover her builds, her teams, how to play her, and just how good she is by talking about her strengths and weaknesses. With that being said, a couple of important things before we begin. First of all, I have been extensively testing her since she came out, and we did calculate basically everything around her, including her specific weapon rankings, which we're going to cover in this video, and a special thanks to Zajev77, my math guy, for that. Also, since this character is relatively new, I do want to encourage you guys to check the pinned comment in case anything changes, or in case there's anything I want to add. With that being said, I want you guys to know that I stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested, and with that out of the way, let's get right into the guide. Now, we're going to start this video off by talking about this character's talents, her playstyles, and just a breakdown of her abilities, because a lot of these are like essays, and there's just like a lot of text here, so I will break it down and simplify it so that you understand how this character works. Her skill is pretty straightforward. Basically, it'll deal electro damage, and then it'll apply an Eye of Stormy Judgment to your party member, your active party member, which will basically deal an attack alongside your character, which deals AoE electro damage. This also generates some particles, and while the damage of this ability is okay, it's not amazing, the best part of this is not only the extremely long duration, but especially the elemental burst damage bonus that it provides your whole team. In fact, while my talent level is pretty low, right, it's level 6, at level 6, it gives you 0.27% of the energy cost of your burst in damage. This means that when you pair this ability with someone who has an 80 energy cost burst, right, a character like Beto, a character like Sing Chu, whose bursts have very high costs, same thing with someone like Eula, they will gain 21.6% burst damage at talent level 6 and 23% at talent level 8, which is a relatively normal talent level to have. This ability basically gives you quite a lot of burst damage to your other party members, which is very nice, and an ability you should use at the start of your rotation. Using your elemental skill, then swapping to your support characters and using their bursts is usually the way to go. Also, a few other things I wanted to mention is that Baal can buff herself with this burst damage bonus, and that the Eye can only do coordinated attacks every 0.9 seconds. Very quickly, to give you guys an idea of how much damage I'm going to be gaining, I'm going to use Zhongli's burst with and without using Raiden's E. Do keep in mind that my Raiden's talent level is only level 6, so it will increase it higher at level 8, 9, 10. So when I just use E and then Q, this is how much damage I'm dealing, 92,000. Now, if I reset and use Raiden's E, we'll see how much I deal. So I'm going to use Raiden's E, swap to Zhongli, use my shield, and then when I use my burst, it'll deal 96,900, so almost 97k, which is a pretty good increase on one of my characters, and the skill does buff, obviously, all the party members when they use their burst. Next up, we're going to talk about her elemental burst, which is an ability that looks way more complicated than it actually is, so I'm just going to simplify it and make this very straightforward. Basically, Raiden starts by dealing AoE electro damage with one slice, and the damage this deals actually increases based on how many stacks of resolve you have, which are some stacks that you get when you use elemental bursts on other characters. Because of that, you're usually going to use your other party members' bursts first, and then use your Baal's burst at the end, because it will be dealing more damage based on how many resolve stacks you gain from your other party members' bursts, and a talent that we'll talk about later. After that initial hit, you're going to enter a state that I can't pronounce that converts your attacks, your normal charge and plunge attacks, into electro damage, and they also count as burst damage. This means that you'll benefit greatly from not only electro damage bonus, but also anything that buffs your elemental burst damage. So something like the Emblem of Severed Fate set can be really good here, because as you can see, it does increase your burst damage by a significant amount, which does apply to all of your normal attacks inside of this state. Lastly, you also gain resistance to interruption, and you're immune to electro charge damage. The most important part of her burst, in my opinion, is that you actually act as a battery for your whole team. While you're normal attacking, you're going to be generating energy for your entire party. Do keep in mind that while you're using this ability, you want to stay on field for basically its entire duration, because when you swap out, it ends. And the stance that this ability puts you in does last for 7 seconds. It has an 18-second cooldown and a very high energy cost of 90, but this usually isn't too big of a deal since you're running a ton of energy recharge on this character. In terms of your optimal rotations, generally speaking, you're going to use your elemental skill first to buff all your character's burst damage, then use all your other characters' bursts, then swap back to Baal and use her burst, because then you'll gain the resolve bonus from all your other characters, and you'll regenerate everyone's energy with your auto attacks. Your typical combos inside of your burst are doing the 3-hit a lot, so either 3 normal attacks into a charge attack or 3 normal attacks into like a dash. And you can also spam charge attacks sometimes, but they do cost quite a lot of stamina. Lastly, do keep in mind that you gain a lot of bonuses by leveling this talent. By gaining basically everything increases your normal attacks, your energy restoration, and just the damage of the initial hit as well, and the resolve bonus. So it is really good to upgrade this talent. Your skill is also good because it increases your burst damage to all your party members. So leveling both these talents are pretty important, with your burst definitely being the #1 priority. For your passive talents, they're pretty simple. Your first one gives you some resolve stacks to your burst, increasing that damage when nearby party members gain elemental orbs or particles. So when you're gaining energy, you're going to gain those resolve stacks. Your second passive is actually a really good one. You get this after ascending past level 60, so 60 out of 70. Effectively gives Raiden a ton of damage and greater energy restoration from her elemental burst. In fact, for every 1% energy recharge you have over 100, you gain 0.6% greater energy restoration from your burst and 0.4% electro damage bonus, which can be really good, especially considering that you're going to be stacking a lot of energy recharge on this character. Let's say you have 200% ER. Both of these values are going to be multiplied by 100, giving you 40% electro damage bonus and 60% greater energy restoration from your burst. Now, I wanted to add a section talking about Baal's strengths and weaknesses, or overall power level, because I've noticed most content creators are just overhyping this character without really providing any nuance, and I don't want you guys to be baited to pulling for her if you don't want her. I do want to say that personally I really like this character, and she is very good at her specific role, which is providing energy while being on field, dealing damage, and once again, being a battery for your entire team. That means that in something like a Eula comp or other teams that we'll talk about in the team comp section, she can shine exceptionally well and be great. However, she's not as sort of overpowered as other archons like Zhongli or Venti, and isn't as universal, as good in every single team. She does need specific team comps to shine. On top of that, since she is electro and can't proc the best reactions and doesn't have the highest scalings, the damage she deals when she's on field isn't as high as some other characters. So I believe she's a balanced unit and fills a very specific role of being a good battery for your entire team, flexible in the teams that she can be viable in, while really being like optimal or really good in a specific set of teams that we'll talk about in that section. A big thing I want to address in this section though is actually how her burst doesn't work with Beto's burst, which invalidates a lot of team comps that otherwise would have been amazing. Now, looking at these two characters, you might think that they have a lot of synergy together. When you look at Beto's burst, it has a high energy cost, a high duration, and you can use it from off field. Whenever a character normal or charge attacks, Beto's burst will bounce everywhere, deal a ton of damage, and she's a character who, as I said, works from off field, but also needs a lot of energy, needs an electro battery. So obviously everyone was thinking Beto and Baal were going to be good together, but for some reason, Beto's burst just doesn't proc off of Baal's normal attacks inside of her burst, making the synergy between these two characters very bad and invalidating a lot of team comps that would otherwise, in my opinion, be very, very good. And the reason for this, in case you're wondering, is because her burst the normal attacks during her burst are considered burst damage and not normal attacks, so it doesn't trigger Beto's burst, which I find very dumb. That being said, it is worth mentioning that Baal's elemental skill does buff your burst damage, which you can use to buff Beto's burst, which is really nice. And it is also worth mentioning that Baal's burst normal attacks do work with other effects like Fischl C6 or Xingqiu's Rain Swords, as you guys can see, that do proc on her normal attacks, but unfortunately, Beto's burst does not, which sucks. So to reiterate, she's a character who has very good strengths, but also very significant restrictions, to where she's very good in specific team comps, but not universally broken. So I want to be very honest to not overhype or underhype a character. She has a lot of potential and is someone that I really like, so someone that I'm going to be playing, but she does require a specific team comp to shine, while also being a good replacement in many teams if there's a character you don't have, or just want a lot of energy to be comfy, or if it fits your rotation and playstyle. And it's also worth noting that she has a lot of potential with future characters who might have a high energy cost burst. With all that out of the way, let's talk about the Raiden Shogun's best builds. For your artifact sets, it's pretty straightforward. The best set, and basically the only one I can recommend, is the Emblem of Severed Fate set, because the 2-piece gives you 20% energy recharge, which is great on Raiden, and the 4-piece increases your elemental burst damage by 25% of your energy recharge for a maximum of 75% damage, which is absolutely huge and definitely the best set for her, given your kit and how much energy recharge you're building. If you're running 200% energy recharge, which can be quite common, that will give you 50% burst damage, which is excellent and also increases the damage of your normal attacks during your burst. And yes, there are alternatives like 2 Noblesse with like 2 Thunder Fury, or even Thunder Soother in an electro comp, but I don't really want to talk about those because they feel a lot worse than Emblem of Severed Fate, which is clearly a set made for her and what I recommend. Okay, now regarding the specific artifact stats you want, this is where I see a lot of misconceptions and people building Baal very poorly, so I'm going to try to be as detailed in the section, but also keeping it somewhat brief to not waste any time. The way you should look at Baal's artifacts is that there's a lot of flexibility here, and the best pieces can depend on your teams your playstyle, and of course your substats. First of all, as a general rule, just for substats on all your pieces, crit rate, crit damage, energy recharge, and attack percent are all very good for Raiden. For your specific main stats, this is where it can get a bit complicated. For your sands, you either want energy recharge or attack percent, both of them being very good. Now, attack percent will give you more damage just because your scaling is off your attack. However, energy recharge sands is great for her because it allows you to spam your burst on cooldown, and you do gain bonuses with energy recharge. So Baal as a character basically doesn't lose as much from an ER sands than other characters do. As you guys know, her passive Enlightened one will give you more damage, like electro damage bonus and energy restoration for every 1% energy recharge you have above 100%. So having energy recharge on her does give her damage and energy restoration, which is obviously very nice. That being said, attack percent will still give your Baal more damage. So if you don't need the extra energy restoration for your team, once again, you can play this out based on your team, on your rotations. Attack percent will be better. If not, energy recharge is the way to go. And generally for most players, I would recommend going like the opposite of your weapon. So if you're running an energy recharge weapon like the catch or many others we'll talk about, I would go for an attack percent sands to not overstack on energy recharge. And if you're running an offensive or attack percent weapon, you should go ER sands, which I believe is more comfy for most players, helps your Emblem of Severed Fate set and your passive, despite giving you a bit less damage than the attack sands. For Baal's Goblet, this can also be quite complicated because attack percent and electro damage are both very good. And generally speaking, a very simple way to look at this is just go with whichever one you have that has better substats, although I usually tend to recommend attack percent. That being said, this can depend on many factors, which I'm going to explain very clearly. First of all, since the Emblem of Severed Fate set gives you so much burst damage, and since your Ascension 4 passive, the Enlightened one, gives you a bunch of electro damage bonus, you're basically gaining so much damage percent that stacking up more and more basically gives you diminishing returns or less and less value for every damage percent you're gaining. Because of that, having attack percent on the Goblet can be very nice and oftentimes the best. However, and I'll put them on screen right now, there are a few conditions when the Goblet you want can be electro or attack, depending on what you're running. For example, if you're running Sara or Bennett, characters that buff your attack a lot, since you're gaining so much attack percent, electro damage bonus can be better. And since a lot of people are going to be running either an ER Sands or, the catch, an ER weapon, which also gives you damage percent with your passive and the emblem set, attack percent Goblet is usually better in those situations, as you can see, but both are really good and highly depend on your substats. And so that's the best way I can explain it. It can depend on a lot of factors, which I tried to explain. Generally speaking, I recommend attack percent, but electro is also very good, depending on your substats and your teams and rotation. Lastly, for your circlet, it's pretty straightforward. You just want crit rate or crit damage because it's just the best on her. Crit is amazing, and it is the best option for your circlet. Now we're going to talk about Raiden's weapons, and there's a lot of really good options, being great free-to-play options and also some amazing 5 stars. Also, I will be including in this section a complete weapon ranking, showing exactly how good every weapon is, in case you guys are wondering what's the best for you. First of all, however, I do want to say that the new free-to-play weapon, the catch, is really good for Baal. At Refinement 5, this weapon gives you an insane amount of burst damage and burst crit rate, which basically buffs all your damage since you're mainly a burst damage dealer. The 32% burst damage is insane, and on top of that, it gives you a high amount of energy recharge on your main stat of the weapon, which is really good for Baal, on top of a decent base attack, and once again, that crit rate to your burst. In fact, at R5, I highly recommend this as the best 4-star option overall, better than any other 4-star you can use. And so it's not only a great free-to-play option, but it's also good for, just most players, since it does outclass other 4-stars. Now, if you are using the catch on another character and you can't use that as your 4-star, something like a deathmatch can also be good, or Blacklift Pole, or even a Favonius Lance, especially at high refinement, to give you a lot of particles. That being said, there are 5-star weapons that are better. The Staff of Homa and the Primordial Jadewing Spear are both great. Because of the insane amount of stats that they give you, Homa gives you a huge amount of crit damage, a good effect when you're under 50% HP, whereas Jade Spear gives you a great effect and a high base attack. Now for your best assault, it's obviously the new polearm sort of designed for Raiden, which is the Engulfing Lightning. This polearm gives you 55% energy recharge at level 90 and a pretty high base attack of 608, on top of the effect being great, giving you 28% of your energy recharge that you have over 100, up to a maximum of 80%, although realistically you're not going to get that much. And on top of that, the last part of the effect gives you 30% energy recharge for 12 seconds after you use your burst, which you can have a pretty high uptime on, increasing not only, your ER obviously, but also the attack percent you're gaining from this passive, making it a very good choice, and oftentimes just the best choice for Raiden. Now, if you want a sort of visual representation of what I said, here's a specific weapon ranking, although keep in mind this can depend on you, it depends on your substats, and there are some assumptions. For example, you can see above 250% ER, running your best goblets, so attack percent with weapons that would want attack percent, and electro damage goblets with weapons that would benefit more from that. We can see that the catch is the best 4-star weapon other than an R5 deathmatch, which I highly don't recommend getting because refining a deathmatch usually isn't worth it, and overall she just has a lot of good options. Also, you guys might have noticed that Skyward Spine and Catch are pretty similar, since Skyward Spine is a pretty good 5-star for Raiden, but as a summary, the Catch is the best 4-star, and all the 5-star options are just really good for her, with the new one, Engulfing Lightning, being the best. For Raiden's Constellations, first of all I want to say she's fine at C0, so don't feel forced to pull, but she does have some pretty cool ones. First of all, her Constellation 1 is kind of whatever. It gives you more resolve stacks, basically you just generate them faster. If you're running another electro character in your team, whenever they use a burst, you gain 80% more resolve stacks. The amount of resolve you gain is increased by 80%, and then other elemental bursts from other characters that are non-electro will give you 20% more resolve. Overall, this constellation is kind of whatever, but does get better if you're running an electro team. Your second constellation is one of your best, and it is pretty early on to where it's somewhat accessible. This will allow Raiden's burst to ignore 60% of the opponent's defense, which is really good. This can increase your total DPS of around 30 to 40%, depending on how many auto attacks and stuff you're doing, but generally speaking, the 60% defense shred is really good to increase your Baal's damage. Do keep in mind though that you don't need this constellation, but it is a nice one, and it is quite early on. Your Constellation 3 and 5 both increase your talent levels, so nothing too special there. With your third constellation increasing your burst damage, which can be quite good because 3 talent levels on your burst, which is most of your damage, is quite significant. Your fourth constellation is kind of weird. Basically, when the state applied by your burst, which I would probably mispronounce, expires, it buffs all your other party members by 30% attack for 10 seconds, which is a nice buff after you use your burst, so it can be good after like your first rotation, but it's really not that big of a deal. It's not the best constellation. It's just a bit of attack for your other characters after your burst. For your sixth constellation, this one is like super weird. It's very unique because basically it'll just decrease the elemental burst cooldown of all your other characters' bursts when you're in Raiden's burst auto attacking. The problem with this is that a lot of your characters' bursts don't have that much downtime, don't have that long of a cooldown, and if you do reduce the cooldown an insane amount, it also increases how much energy you need. That being said, this constellation does have potential in certain team comps, maybe with like a Xiangling or a Eula who have high energy cost and pretty high cooldown bursts. So it does have potential, but it doesn't seem like that amazing, and a very niche C6 that probably isn't worth the money. Overall though, her most impressive constellations are definitely 2. 3 is pretty good too, but 2 is like the main one, but she is perfectly fine at C0. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Raiden Shogun's teams. This is a section I was really not looking forward to recording because there's a lot to say, and Raiden's very unique here. Basically, there's a select few teams where she's really wanted, notably this Eula comp where she can shine very well, but there are a lot of other synergies she can have where she can be a viable replacement to a character you might not have, or just a good alternative, or can have potential. So she is both very flexible as a replacement, but also very restricted in what teams she's like the best in, since she does fill a very specific and niche role, as I mentioned earlier in the video. So what does that leave us with? Well, first of all, the Eula comp, running Eula with Raiden, I believe is very, very good for both of these characters. They synergize super well together. Eula, as you guys know, is a hyper carry who needs a lot of energy, usually ran with a cryo battery and a decent amount of ER to get her massive and high energy cost burst on cooldown. Eula can have a downtime on her burst, right? Like about a 7-second downtime, which is pretty big on her burst. So having a character like Raiden who perfectly completes Eula by filling in the downtime, by being on field auto attacking, and by providing energy to your whole team, giving your Eula her burst back on cooldown is really good and definitely one of the strongest synergies for Baal. So for those reasons, I really like pairing these two characters together, and then the other two characters on this team can look something like this, but there are many alternatives. Other than this team, which is my favorite one so far, there are a few that Baal can work in. One of them is a variation on the national team, which is a Xiangling Xingqiu Bennett comp, where Xiangling is the main carry, constantly vaporizing her Pyronado, and in this team you're running Raiden to allow your Xiangling to basically benefit from elemental mastery by both vaporizing and overloading simultaneously. Raiden can use her burst while Xiangling's Pyronado and Xingqiu's rain swords are active, allowing a bunch of elements to be applied, a bunch of reactions to, happen and deal a pretty good amount of damage. The only problem I have recommending this team is that there's already a lot of other replacements like Sucrose, like Kazuha, like Zhongli that you can use instead of Baal. However, Baal is definitely a viable option in this team. So if you do have her and you do like her, this is a comp that can work. Baal can also work well in a Child Fireworks team as a replacement for Fischl. Not only can you replace your Fischl if she's not C6, but even at C6, Baal against multiple targets can shine exceptionally well. The only problem is that your rotation can be a bit weird, since as we saw earlier, Beidou and Raiden do have negative synergy because their bursts don't work together. However, Baal still can buff all your team's bursts with her elemental skill and can use her burst during the downtime. So when Child's is on cooldown and Beidou's burst has finished or is about to end, it's on cooldown, you can use Baal's burst, gain all your energy back, be a good battery, and deal damage by being off-field auto attacking. For that reason, she does fit this comp quite well and can be used in this team, but you do have to adapt your rotation. It will be played differently than if you were to run Fischl. On top of that, Baal is a character who can synergize well with Yoimiya because because of the way Yoimiya's burst works, you can use your burst, swap the Baal, and then Yoimiya's burst will proc while Baal is normal attacking. I also wanted to mention that Baal can have positive synergy with a few characters, notably anemo characters that can use Verdescent Venerer to reduce the electro resistance of enemies like Kazuha, who can also buff your electro damage quite significantly. So like Kazuha Bennett with Baal is usually a comp that's just going to deal a lot of damage, but that is mainly because of how Kazuha and Bennett work and not really too Raiden dependent, but that does work. And I also wanted to mention that she does have some synergy with electro characters like Sarah, who has a high energy cost burst and whose 6 Constellation, as you guys I'm sure are aware, increases the crit damage of electro damage quite significantly. So they can work well together, but this is a specific combination that I have to test further. Lastly, I don't recommend running Raiden with Shao. I'm only covering this because I know a lot of people are going to ask. Basically, yes, Shao might need some energy, but you can just run him with an anemo battery and then you don't need much energy recharge. And on top of that, your burst does not have a long downtime. While Eula's burst has a pretty significant downtime, Shao's burst only has 3 seconds of downtime between the 15-second duration and 18-second cooldown, meaning you don't want to be spending like 7 seconds on your Baal because you will be losing out on DPS. Alright, so now we're going to get into the DPS showcase. This is just going to be a floor 12 clear with Raiden. A few things to keep in mind. Number 1, the current floor 12's ley line basically makes you lose a bunch of energy during low tide, or you can't gain energy. So it's really a bad ley line for Baal, but whatever, we're going to clear it. My Baal is pretty good. She's on a Staff of Homa with very good artifacts and 200 ER. She's on the 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate, although her talents could be higher than 6/6. I'm going to run her in a Shangling team just because I feel like this is one of the teams that lets her shine the most, because she's actually going to be auto-attacking and sort of, shining. But she is still a support, so she's not going to be the character dealing the most damage, so obviously keep that in mind. With that being said, I hope the guide was helpful, and I hope you'll enjoy the showcase. Let's go. So yeah, overall, I really like Raiden, but she's not like broken or anything. She's just a pretty powerful unit in a specific role, which is being a great battery who has a lot of potential, especially with future characters or specific team comps right now. And I do hope that they fix the Raiden Beto interaction. And so she's a character I can recommend if you like her, but definitely not a must pull. This guide took a long time to make, and if you enjoyed, feel free to leave a like and subscribe because it does mean a lot. With that being said, I'm gonna go start working on my other guides like Sarah, Aloy, and I need to make a new Shangling one as well. And I'm also gonna have some more fun videos edited in the style of the perfect Shao video, which you guys really enjoyed. So with that being said, that's about it. I hope this guide was helpful, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.